and we do education. And you'll see from some of the posters over here, we are very, very active. We reached out to over 2,000 school kids last year with one part-time staff person and a lot of volunteers. Volunteers are what make us. Out of about 450 or so members, we have, probably 125, 130 active volunteers. We welcome your participation. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities, and actually this year, if you're into science at all, or research, we have a very active water quality monitoring program we've had going for at least the last 15 years. We were able to use our data to upgrade the Kennebec River, working to try and upgrade the Androscoggin River. And we have a number of longtime monitors who are retiring this year from that. And so we have probably somewhere between 4 and 6 monitoring stations open. It's a once-a-month commitment. You can talk to me or Jeff about it. Jeff DeRosa, back behind the camera, is our new executive coordinator. He's a member, sorry. He's a native of Bath, and he's been away for a while, and he's back, and we're really happy to have him. I don't see any other board members here, but we have a lot of volunteers, and Kathleen McGee, a former board member, Ruth behind her, water quality monitor for many years, so in the lab. So yeah, research, we do water quality stuff. We've done some really neat things like a circulation study of the bay, first of its kind. There's a big poster about that back yonder there. We are fierce advocates for those who can't speak out on their own, in this case often fish. So we've actually got first ever Endangered Species Act lawsuits against corporations, the people that are killing fish at hydroelectric dams going. In the past, ESA suits for illegal take, the euphemism for killing fish or impairing them in some major way, the suits have been filed against government agencies. So this is a first, and the defendants in the case are the companies that own the 4 lower dams on the Kennebec, the 3 lower dams on the Androscoggin. And a couple of those are multi-billion-dollar companies that easily have the resources to take care of the issue. When we go into schools or go to a bay day where we have kids coming out to us, Kathleen often does anadromous fish printing, the Japanese art of gayutoko, and how you record the fish. And it's pretty good to ask a bunch of 4th graders to talk to them about the problem of fish getting killed by turbines and say, well, how would you fix this? And it usually takes them about, 30 seconds, a minute, to kind of come up with, well, why don't you put a screen in front of the turbines? So it's a simple fix, and the company should be doing it. Active land trusts have protected over 1,000 acres around the bay. I don't know if we have a poster up about that, but some flyers over there about it. We are just about done now with a major project, 4-year project at least now, protecting the most significant prehistoric archaeological site on the bay. And I know there's obviously a lot of history fans here. There's a brochure over there called the Houdelet Conservation Project. It's in Dresden, site of a former Native American fishing village when sea levels were lower. So archaeology, also a really great spot for rare plants. So research, advocacy, conservation, and education, that's most of it. The series costs us about $800 a year to put on, and Patagonia helps us out with it. Patagonia down in Freeport by giving us a piece of clothing to raffle off. So we do a little door prize thing. If you'd like to be eligible for that or support us in any way, thing here, take a piece of paper, write your name on it, put it in the cardboard box. I wrote Charlie's name on it. Put some money in the basket, and we'll have a door prize raffle before we go.
So far, after that.
So far, your odds are good. So, Charlie, I've known Charlie quite a while. He and his wife Judy have been longtime Friends of Merrymeeting Bay members. They live up in Richmond, and Charlie's been a big fan of all things nautical and musical for many, many years. He's researched nautical history extensively, researched music extensively, and has taken a lot of that information and incorporated into what he does with the banjo or other instruments, and he has played and sung all around the world. So it's a pleasure to have him here tonight, combining both of those things. Plays with a band called Roll and Go, and also on his own. He's played in the UK, he's played in Australia, and he's played here, obviously. He's got numerous CDs, all of which he forgot to bring tonight. So I don't know how people buy them from you, but
It's a website.
it's a website. Okay, look
It's
up
hard to find. It's www.
CharlieIpcar.com.
Yeah.
So, and Charlie also coordinates or helps coordinate the Side Door Cafe, which is a monthly. George saying, "Oh, I hoped he'd say something about that." George also is active in it. George Sargent. Side Door Cafe used to be in the side door of that UU church over there, where the big hole is on the corner there. But until that church is rebuilt, it's over here, and it's a folk music evening for anyone who wants to come and play something. And you don't have to be.
And when is it?
I'm getting to that. You don't have to be, you don't have to have CDs burned to come and play at the folk music night. And it just so happens it's on the third Friday of each month, which happens to be a few days from now. Starts at 7 o'clock. Well, sign up is at 7?
Correct.
Music starts at when?
Usually around 7:50.
And there'll be a feature act, which is in the second half of the evening, if I remember, right?
Beginning and
But it's an open mic night. It's an open mic before that. So for the first hour, come at 7 o'clock, sign up, and you can sing in front of a very friendly crowd, and you'll have a great time. And there's some great music here.
You don't have to sing either.
You can story tell or something like that. What's that? Oh yeah, well I sort of took that for granted. Yes, you could sit and listen too, but you could, if you have a performing gene in you, you can exercise it in any number of possible ways. So with that, I'll give you this, Charlie, and I will say as you're putting this on that our next.
What do we do with
We
those?
just put that on your shirt right here.
Maybe you can clip it on. I clip it on in my beard.
Oh, we could do that. It makes that scratching noise. Scratching noise then. So this event happens on the second Tuesday or Wednesday of each month. It's Tuesdays for the rest of this year. We'll be here again next month with Nate Gray, who's a board member of ours, and fish restoration biologist for the Department of Marine Resources. And he helped move 2.75 million alewives up over the Benton Falls Dam on the Sasanoa last year. So that'll be Tales of the Kennebec, Tails, of the Kennebec and Sasanoa next time. And then our last event for the season will be Paul Watson. Change of venue will be at the Maine Maritime Museum in May. And it's Bowden, so come see him in Bath, City of Ships. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to speak into the mic. Hopefully that will make it easier to hear me. I'll be singing without the mic. You'll still be able to hear me. But before I do this, I want to get a better idea of who's in the audience. You don't have to give me your names one by one. That'll take at least half an hour. But I'm wondering if any of you have ever traveled on any of the steamboats that ran from Bath to Boothbay. Yeah, my mother still remembers the last run of the Virginia from Bath to Boothbay, which was 1941, and one of the steamboats we'll be talking about, the Sabino, it has been moved and renovated and put back together again down in Mystic, Connecticut at the Maritime Museum there. And she runs around the bay 4 or 5 times, fires up the engines, and someone shovels in the coal. It's a pretty neat operation, and they keep her in excellent condition. If we're very good, I'll figure out some way to get her back up here. I'm pretty sure we'd have to bribe them, but it'd be really fun to do a couple of cruises along there in a steamboat. So anyway, what I'm doing will probably take about 40 minutes, depending on how many distractions there are. and I'm quite willing to stop this whole show to answer questions or hold them for the end. There can be, sometimes there's engineering types in here who know a lot more about steam power than I do. But probably the best preview I can do of the entire show is to sing the song, because that will sort of run you down the route. And it's a song I put together, and it's as if you have the pilot of the steamboat explaining the route to the apprentice as they're running along, and looking forward to maybe a beer or two at the Boothbay end. So we'll start with that. And of course the banjo will be in perfect tune. They do that at the factory. Now there's many a steamer looks just fine, shovel in the coal and let her run. But they'll never beat the boats of the Eastern Line. When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Now we're steaming out from the Kennebec Pier, shovel in the coal and let her run. Hear our whistle blow loud and clear. When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Now it's swinger hard for the Sasanoa River, shovel in the coal and let her run. Keep to the channel or you're stuck here forever. When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Then it's down the upper Hellgate, steady and fast, shovel in the coal and let her run. Don't scrape the ledges as we fly past. When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Past Hockamuck and cross the bay, shovel in the coal and let her run. For Castle Island out there away, when we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Down the upper hill, down the lower hill gates of Westport Pier, shovel in the coal and let her run. Drop off the dry goods that's ordered here. When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Then it's down the river to the Rigsville dock, shovel in the coal and let her run. Where the summer folks all come down in flocks, we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Through Goose Rock Passage to Five Allen Spear, shovel in the coal and let her run. There's barrels of salt cod awaiting here. When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. It's cross the sheets, stop past the middle part, shovel in the coal and let 'em run. It's wave at the seal and sunning on the rocks. When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Then it's nose into Southport for one last stop, shovel in the coal and let her run. Then it's spread the goddamn plow to the drop. When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. Now Boothbay havers coming into view, shovel in the coal and let her run. But there's so many boats, what shall we do? When we make Boothbay, we'll have great fun. There's summer sloops racing all around, shovel in the coal and let her run. And there's one aloft There were many steamboat lines in the 19th century. I mentioned the Eastern line, the Eastern Steamboat Line, and that was one of the bigger ones. It was one of the survivors and the last survivor. They wound up their steamboat operations, at least on the rivers, around World War II. And some of the steamboats were converted to gasoline, and they continued on in the Boothbay area for some period of time. But back around 1900, it was the way to get around from one part of the peninsulars to other parts of peninsulars. It still takes 45 minutes to get from, say, Georgetown all the way around to Westport Island if you're going by land, and it only takes about 10 minutes by boat, even if you row. So it was a very handy thing, and you could go from one end to the other, stopping at least 10 or 12 places, depending on the season, in about 2 hours for about $1. And then they picked up freight, and they delivered freight, and in addition to passengers. Clearly, they had the most business during the summers, and long about November, December, they sort of they phased things out as the Sasanoa River sort of froze up hard. They might have been able to run the entire season this year. I don't think the Sasanoa was frozen up for more than a week or two. I don't even think they got shanties out there. But anyway, so it was a multi-purpose service, and it was doing fine until the automobile came along and just ran them into the ground. So anyway, let's take a look at some of the boats, and we'll see what happens. Nothing happens. Well, I don't know why it's frozen now. Look at that. Magic fingers. Okay, this is a vintage map. And over here is Bath, looking at the little jiggling dot. And if you start at Bath, you run down the Sasanoa River, Woodlock, Hockomock Bay, and down through the Hell Gates. And this is Robin Hood now. It used to be called Riggsville. So that's the Riggsville dock in my song. And then you run through Goose Rock Passage here, if you're lucky, and then over to Five Islands, and then across the Sheepscot, and the middle Mark Island is where the seals hang out. And then you'd stop into Southport, and then down probably some of the islands, like there were several islands down here besides Squirrel Island that boats would stop at during the summer, and then end up in Boothbay at the Eastern Dock. So that's a vintage map from around 1900. And here's one of the fleets from 1890. The Sasanoa, the Sasanoa, the Samoset, and the Creedmoor. Creedmoor's that little teeny dinky one down over there. And the largest one would be about 90 feet long. And towards the end of around the 1920s, they had some that were as big as 120 feet. But the Eastern and the Western, they were called, and they really were too big for the Sasanoa. They kept bouncing off the sides, and that's not good for a boat. So they decided that 70 or 80 feet was better. Here's another bunch, and I can't really read them from here. But again, there's a little, I think it's the Island Belle is over here, or the Samoset.
Samoset, Granada.
Yeah, and this is the Wasuna. Well, anyway, they're located now, and they're rafted up in Boothbay. And they would advertise, you know, they'd 15 cents, or adults for 35 cents. I think this was more of a come-on because their normal price was not 35 cents. But, you know, they'd encourage people to come along and just enjoy the run down the river, and there'd be entertainment on the boats, probably somebody playing banjo and accordion. And they'd have programs here. And you could even figure out, this is how I figured out how long it took to get from one place to another. Not that you can read it, but they really they did about 3 or 4 runs per day from Bath to Boothbay. And it would take generally about 2 hours for the full run. If they were not making stops, they could do it a lot quicker. But the whole point was stopping everywhere. So here we are starting in Bath. And this is right about where the city landing is now, off Front Street. And you can see one of the steamers pulled up in front. And here's a closer view. Here's the Wawerna. And many of the early steamboats were named in honor of Maine Indian chiefs. So they were sort of working on the romance of all that. And this one's the Virginia, and you can see everybody's here in the carriages and bringing the freight in and bringing passengers in. So you're still in Bath. And here's the Virginia loading up. And this is an old postcard. Some of the people were in a photograph and hand-colored. Others were just sort of added in with ink. So this was early Photoshop. Yeah. And now what on earth does that read? That's USA. Yep, USA, you got to read it backwards. And that is El Dorado. El Dorado, that was one of the main Kennebec River ones. And there's the El Dorado again, and a smaller one called the M&M. And I still can't figure out what M&M stood for. But again, you see little freight wagons with these big wheels. Don't see too many of them running around. And here we go out on the Wawerna from Bath. And of course, here's the big whistle on the Westport. And this is a vintage map about 1868. So here's Bath, there's no bridge. You just had big steam ferries running back and forth. And so you take off from Bath, and then you'd swing hard to the Sasanoa River. And when I talk about staying to the channel, that's a good idea, especially if it's not full tide, because you can end up on any of these mud banks. This is where our favorite eagle's nest is, sitting on an island here that you can view from the bridge. And here are the upper Hell Gates mentioned. And there used to be a little drawbridge crossing the Sasanoa between Woolwich and Arousic. And my mother managed to photograph the Virginia going through on her last run back in 1941. So she was just running right through the drawbridge. And lots of people up there on the front deck. And she's about to turn down the Sasanoa River. And here we are floating through passing through the upper Hell Gates. And this is an interesting shot. It's the Nahanada, and it's photoshopped. There's no way that boat is floating in the river. It was just sort of cut and pasted and stuck in there. And I think the kid was stuck in there too, because sometimes you see postcards without the kid on the rock. So you can have a lot of fun with photographs. But they really ran, and it's pretty narrow in here. I doubt if you have more than 30 feet from one shore to the other when you're going down the Hell Gates. And if it's low tide, you're going down a waterfall practically. So through the upper Hell Gates, and then past Hockomock Bluff, which is right here, and Hockomock Bay, Castle Islands across the bay, and sometimes you see some seals hanging out on one of the ledges there. And this was one of the Westport ferry stops, and there was another one down here somewhere. And this one was at a location of a mill, and I'm still not quite sure where this one was. So at some point I'm going to be making a presentation over at Westport, and I'm sure somebody will know exactly where it was. And here's the Wawerna landing at the Westport Junction, as they describe it here in the old postcard. And again, it doesn't give me enough background to identify whether that's the upper Westport landing or the lower one. Here's an aerial shot from around the 1960s. And here's the lower Hell Gates, Westport Island. Here's Robin Hood Marina before there's really was much development. Here's our farmhouse, which is right over here. And here is Goose Rock Passage, McMahon Island. You can even see the fire break from part of the island to the other. And Five Islands is over here. So you're coming into Riggsville here, and there were a lot of summer people there, as it mentions in the song. And they would build schooners in Riggsville at the time, and some of the people would go out fishing with them. And here's the boat coming into the Riggsville landing. And here's your welcome party, waiting for the boat. Everybody dressed up for either welcoming their friends or boarding the boat and going on to Boothbay. And here's a shot of the crew, of the steamer crew, in front of the Riggsville store there. And you can see there's some great deals here from the advertising. All sorts of stuff one can buy. But typically each steamer would have a pilot and a first mate and of course someone to shovel the coal and a couple of deckhands for handling the boat coming in and out. There'd also be a shipping clerk for the freight or a purser, and probably somebody who was making refreshments. It might just be that fellow right there. And then, of course, there's always somebody who misses the boat. Remember that well. This is again, Riggsville, and this is called the Nubble, which is now quite covered with trees, but at this point was just big fields with just a little house on the top. So if you don't make the boat, you just have to wait. And, okay, here the steamer has come through Goose Rock Passage, and she's swinging up what's called the Little Sheepscot River, past McMahon Island. And she's going to stop at McMahon Island and pick up some more summer folks. And it's the El Dorado, and there's two lovely ladies here all decked out. And here's the landing. Any idea what this thing is on top of the little landing shack?
Not
Not exactly.
Light signal?
It's a signal to tell whether it's the equivalent of a whistle stop. So if it was horizontal, it meant stop. If it's up and down, it meant you can go by unless you have someone to drop off. Or it's quite possible I've got it mixed up. But I think when it's horizontal, you'll see people, passengers, sort of all geared up to go. And here we're landing at McMahon, and there's a little cart here for baggage and stuff, and everyone all, lined up to go aboard. And we're right over here in McMahon Island, and we're gonna go through the Narrows here, all the way over to Five Islands. And coming out of here, and then Five Islands is over here somewhere. No, Five Islands is right here. Yep. Here's McMahon Island over here. So run around here to Five Islands. Here's Malden Island over here. And as I always tell people, you can always count the islands out here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and where's the fifth island? It's right there, when you're standing on. And here's a view of Five Islands as you come around and head into the harbor around 1900. And there were a lot of yachts at that time, because a lot of folks from Boston came up and summered on Malden Island. And there's 30 cottages there, and I'm sure their descendants are still hanging in there. And here they are lining up for the boats. This is the current lobster wharf that should be opening any day now that it's 60 degrees. And there's Malden Island in the background. And a little steamer down here. And that's one of the bigger steamers. That's either the Eastport or the Westport. And they were about 120 feet long. And there are the seals sunning themselves on the rocks in the middle of the Sheepscot. And, okay, here's the northern end of Southport Island, where there used to be a ferry landing. The current bridge is down at this end, right about here. And there used to be an old bridge, an old drawbridge further up. And then these are other islands that they would stop at. Squirrel Island, of course. And then here's the eastern landing in Boothbay Harbor. So here's the landing in Southport at the upper landing. That's the view from the river. And here's the view looking down the street to the ferry landing. So you have a post office, and you have all these people ganged up, and obviously important people get a carriage to pick them up. And then coming out from there, you go through the Narrows, through what's called Townsend's Gut. And that's the chop I was talking about in the song, because sometimes the swells are coming in and you're running down this channel trying to get out. And then here we are coming into Squirrel Island. And this is one of the few photographs that I found of the Squirrel Island landing. There's a lot of postcard views of this as well. And that's either the Eastport or the Westport at the landing. And look, see, horizontal, right up there, at the steamer signal. You gotta stop. And that, I believe, is the Virginia. And this one is the Island Bell, you can just see land Bell up here. And again, here's some stevedores loading on the freight, and lots of passengers getting ready to get aboard. And here's the sloops in Boothbay Harbor racing every which way. It really gets crazy there in the summer, and it's even worse when they're traveling, with these big cigarette boats at 60 or 70 miles an hour in the 5-mile-an-hour zone. And here's the steamers coming into the eastern landing, around the corner here. And this little walkway is still there with a little house in the middle of it. It's my favorite. There's a public landing and a float right below that, which is my favorite place for parking when I go to Boothbay. Not as busy as the other public landing. But now you know. And these are the eastern docks, and this is either the westport or the eastport. And they're loading her up with probably possibly sending some fish or some other product to Bath. They have these big freight doors here that are opened. And typically people would go from Boothbay to Bath, they'd catch the train to Portland, and then maybe the steamer from Portland to Boston or Portland down to New York. My mother remembers coming up from the steamer to Portland, and I remember the steam locomotives. They used to come into Bath.
Was there a train then that went down from Portland or not?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. They would come all the way down to Bath and then across, and then they'd take the steam ferry to Woolwich, the train cars, and pick up an engine on the other side and continue on up. So it was an incredible network of rail and steamer. And again, here's the Wawerna crew. Captain Irving Pierce, the rear left. I'm not sure if it's my left or your. This looks more like a captain. And it looks like an awfully big crew, so they may have a few extra people there. And here we are leaving Boothbay. We're not going to go all the way to Bath, but we're going to at least get out of Boothbay Harbor. And here you're passing Birch Point on the way to Townsend Gut. The fisheries research place is around the corner over here. And here's the Virginia. She's obviously my favorite. And another one of the Virginia. This is like watching somebody's slideshows, Our favorite time. And here she is on her final run, passing through the new Southport Bridge. It had just been built. And that's still there, and there's an osprey nest on top of it, in case you're interested.
So what year was that final run?
1941 was the last run. And here she goes, actually through Townsend Gut after the bridge. And yeah, we do what we can to make it all pretty. This is one of the steamer captains, and I'm totally blanking. I should know all this stuff. But he was in retirement, and he had lots of models, and his daughter put together one of the most beautiful photo essay books on steamboating in this area. So that was what I began with, and then I began looking for, where did she get her photographs, and scanning better and better photographs so that it could actually show up. And okay, there's his name, Clark D. Rowe. So that's the kind of certificate you would hope to get after signing on as a decky and working your way up to first mate and then finally captain. And here's a little Sabino down at Mystic. Same kind of boat. She's about 70 feet long and is still run by coal. There's the furnace, and there's the operational end of the shovel, and here's the actual boiler up here. And all this hardware goes up and down and makes the whole ship go. And they take you on about a half-hour cruise around Mystic Harbor. It's a great way to see the museum from the middle of the river. But they really have a lot of wonderful ships there, including the Joseph Conrad, a training ship from around 1900. And they're totally rebuilding the Charles W. Morgan, a surviving whale ship. They've hauled her out, and they're doing a total hull rebuild. And they're planning to sail her for the first time in about 60 years when they relaunch her a couple of years from now. Sail her back to New Bedford, say hello, and then sail back. Yep, there's the Sabino. And, you know, just in case you want to pilot one of these things, here's the wheel. And here's where you put your beer cans. And the pilot. And that's about it. So it's a quick show. And I'd be perfectly happy to answer any questions you might have.
Can you talk about the engines that propel these boats up?
Not very much, other than their top speed was about 12 knots, and they could run from Bath to Boothbay in a little over an hour if they weren't stopping everywhere, which way. But no, I'm not an expert on the kind of power plants that they had. Very quiet, though, like all steam engines, until something gives way. Yeah, other questions? Yes?
What about like the safety and fires, and for the people, do they have safety precautions?
A few of them ran aground. There's no record of any one of them having caught fire during operation. Typically, they would catch fire when they were being overhauled in the yard, and that would do them in. But occasionally they'd get hung up, or they'd end up in a mud bank and have to wait for the tide. The larger ones that were servicing Penobscot Bay, some of those were 200 feet long, and they would run into trouble. But it's pretty tricky navigating if it's foggy in that river. I grew up there, and I could get turned around in Robin Hood Cove if I wasn't careful. You know, I thought I knew where I was going, and you know, eventually you'd hit a shore, and it wouldn't be where you thought it was. And you'd, of course, have somebody up in the bow with a sack of potatoes, you know, so you could navigate by potato. Splash, splash, clunk. Next question. Yes.
Did they vary the schedule? Did they have to vary the schedule depending on what the tides were?
Not particularly. No, they actually had a fixed schedule, and although it would have been trickier navigating the Hellgates, those were the sort of pinch points, you know, on the trip. But looking at the schedule they had, it basically was every hour and a half during the summer, or every 2 hours, you could count on a boat from Bath to Boothbay. And then, you know, as they got into the fall season, they dropped several of the runs. And this was not the only run. There were runs going up to Augusta and runs going from Bath to Popham. Another run that went around Southport Island and came up to Boothbay that way. Yes, in the back.
Were any of these ships designed expressly for the channels that you described because of the draft of the boat?
Not particularly, but you know, when they designed the Westport and the Southport, it turned out they were just really too big. There wasn't enough margin, and they kept rounding out. So that told them something. Yeah. So they were not. Those steamboats would not be safe to take, say, outside, but they were perfectly fine on the rivers. And I'm sure, no, they had mechanical breakdowns, but they didn't have any radios, and they did have a lifeboat, and they had life preservers, but and they probably whistled at their friends too. Yep.
How about the weather, storms, not a problem?
That would be a problem, and if it was outrageous, they just wouldn't go. I mean, you know, the ferries in Casco Bay don't go out to the islands if it's really a gale. So again, it's up to the captain whether they should be, you know, running a risk or not. And of course, it'd be more tricky if it was towards the end of the day. But they also, you know, they did advertise their sunset cruises, and that, you know, it's really gorgeous that time of day. I still have a Boston whaler that I keep down in Georgetown, and I make that run lots of times, and most of the time we're looking out for eagle nests and osprey nests and keeping track of them, and not necessarily watching where the boat is going. Other questions? Yes, one more over here.
Riggsville.
Riggsville.
Was that near Robin Hood or?
That was Robin Hood. Around 1916, there were more people in that village who were not named Riggs, so that when it came up to a vote at the Georgetown meeting, they decided they were going to name it something different. And given that there was a cove called Robin Hood that they named in honor of a Native American chief whose name they couldn't pronounce, they named him Robin Hood. Anyway, they decided to call the village Robin Hood, and it's been Robin Hood ever since. And it's one of many villages of Georgetown Island. Five Islands is another village of Georgetown. Bath is another village that belongs to Georgetown. Other questions? Yeah. So are you going to raise the money to bring the Sabino up to?
Yeah, we're going to see how we did. I should say that speaking of Robin Hood and his merry men, that's one of the possible origins of the name Merrymeeting Bay. Then there's also the six rivers coming together and have a really good time. Mm-hmm. And then there's a derivation from a Western Indian, Midwestern name for Great Rice Pond or Big Rice Pond that Kerry Hardy writes about in his book Notes from a Lost Flute.
Yeah, that's also a.
All connected.
There's in Yorkshire, England, there is a place called Robin Hood's Bay, and I have a lot of music friends that happen to be in Yorkshire, and they're sort of bemused that there's this other Robin Hood in the world that is unrelated to any particular outlaw.
Anyway, two more volunteer opportunities I didn't mention. Bay Day, we have 200-300 kids out on the bay doing hands-on education. Be like May 21st or 2nd, somewhere in there. It's one of the last Tuesdays in May. Talk to Jeff or talk to myself. And then if you're again, history folks, we've done a lot of archaeology days over the years. And the bay, as you might imagine, is a very rich archaeological resource. This year, the State Maine Historic Preservation Commission is going to be doing an important historic excavation up in Richmond. Because the state is planning a new bridge across the river there, they've actually found that at least one of the old Fort Richmonds is bisected by the current approach across the bridge in Richmond. So from mid-April into September, they'll be digging there, and they've asked for our help. So if you're interested, again, talk to myself or Jeff. They'll also be looking for help in the lab later on. Be a lot of artifacts to wash.
Will they be doing a temporary bridge there, or?
I don't know what the bridge won't be going in for another year or so anyway, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know how they will do the
Yeah, the switch.
change.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
Thank you.